Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and welcome to part 3 of our exploration of Asian horror films released in 2018. Now most of the films we're covering tonight are worth a watch, and they span a variety of industries. We're discussing movies from Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And after venturing through some crap and or more risky options during the first two parts of this year, this part 3 video has more consistency in terms of overall quality. I think most fans of Asian horror movies will be able to get something enjoyable out of most of these films. And remember, titles for all the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. So the first film we're covering tonight was one that I highly anticipated, and that is Eerie from the Philippines. The unexpected and gruesome death of a student threatens the existence of an old Catholic school for girls. The school guidance counselor involves herself with the students in the hopes of helping them cope, and at the same time uncover the mysteries of the student's death. Most students initially suspect the caretaker, but the counselor's unusual talents lead her to knowing a former student who's been watching the school for years. Piece by piece, she uncovers the secret of the school and the monster that it nurtured for the past century. Now, long-term subscribers to this channel may remember my full-length review of this film from a while back. I was very excited to watch this because it was directed by Mikhail Red, the man who previously directed Birdshot, which was a fantastic dramatic thriller. In that context, Eerie must be considered a disappointment following that film. And I can actually understand why this movie gets fairly low ratings and negative reviews online. The biggest weakness of Eerie is probably the story and characters, which are not very compelling. Also, there's nothing new here that we haven't seen before, resulting in a number of cliché moments. Those flaws definitely limit the effectiveness of the film as a whole. However, this does have strong technical aspects, specifically direction and sound design, and performances are also solid across the board, which helps to kind of solidify the overall quality of the movie. Now, in terms of horror, it begins with some creepy sound design and visuals. There's a little narration that's like talking about every midnight at the end of the third floor corridor, you'll find a room and no one dares to go there, and stuff like that. It's kind of a nice creepy opening. I liked it. The scares are, typical of ghost films, I would say, but they are executed well enough. There are a few jump scares, but, and they are supplemented by some fairly loud noises, but I felt like the sound design never got too loud in this. It won't blow off your eardrums, you know what I mean? So, I didn't mind them quite as much as usual. It does avoid the typical mirror reflection scares, like the bathroom mirror one and a television reflection scene, and it kind of sets them up, but then avoids them, and I kind of appreciated that. There is a certain anxiety that is created, because it feels like it's setting up the scares all the time, but the release of the scares themselves are spaced out. And it does not degrade itself over and over again with ridiculous quantities of jump scares, despite being a mostly continuous series of horror sequences. Now, my biggest criticism of the horror is that the ending is kind of an anticlimax. Like, it fails to reach a crescendo, and you're left with a feeling of, that's it. So the ending is not very satisfying in this. So this is not like a slam dunk recommendation per se. Probably the least interesting film we're covering tonight. But I do think that it's a step above some of the titles we covered in parts 1 and 2. So the availability of this one is that it is still on Netflix. Alright, now we move to Taiwan for the next title here. And that is The Tagalong, The Devilfish. And this is a straight-up horror film. Now, the movie is based on another famous Taiwanese urban legend, a ghost story that involves 3 men catching and grilling a fish in central Taiwan, only to notice a face appear as they begin to eat it. They then hear a voice ask them, "Is the fish meat tasty?" And this story is a folktale, apparently. And the film introduces the same folktale of these men, and the plot follows the efforts of a group of people involving a temple priest, a young boy, and the boy's mother, as they are harassed by malicious spirits brought on by the caught fish. This is the third film in the tag-along franchise, but it does not concern itself too much with the prior two films, instead focusing on a different urban legend. It does take place before Tag-Along 2, and a few of the supporting characters appear in that film as well. The conflict is resolved in similar ways to the prior films, so it feels familiar in that sense as well. Now, the movie opens with a scene of some old dudes grilling and eating a fish, and the fish gets kind of angry about it. Kind of a goofy premise when you think about it, but it's not a bad scene. Fish are not particularly scary animals, most of them at least, but I liked the related visuals, and it's a bit different in concept. The scares are a mix of small, demonic-looking fish, possessed humans, physical attacks, with people getting suffocated with plastic bags, etc. There are probably more cheap jump scares in this movie when compared to the prior two films in this franchise, and typically don't appreciate that. However, there are also a lot of scenes with characters walking through creepy, abandoned buildings and decrepit environments, which I do like. There's a piano performance at one point where horrific things begin to happen in conjunction with the performance, which is kind of a neat way of presenting things. I enjoyed the scares overall. Pacing is pretty good. It's a very focused story. There's a lack of dull filler, moves along pretty well, and it kind of focuses on the horrific content quite a bit. There's also a little bit of drama involving the female lead, her concerns over a divorce, as well as a man who failed to save his wife from dying. So both are decently effective. So this is a good watch. I think the prior two films of the franchise were more memorable, but the franchise has yet to produce a real stinker, in my opinion, but the films continually slightly degrade with every film. The first film's the best one. Second film, not quite as good as that. Third film, not quite as good as those. So, just so you know. Now, the availability on this one, it's on Tubi. All right, next here, we stay in Taiwan for the next one. Yes. And that is Secrets in the Hot Spring. Now, this is a horror comedy. Xiao Jin transferred to his third school during his 5th year of high school. During the winter vacation, his grandparents tricked him into returning to the hotel, which was founded by his late parents. His classmates tagged along, uninvited, to escape being bullied at school. While the three boys are temporarily staying at this family hotel, they quickly find out that the building is not only in terrible shape, but it's also haunted. Will they find out the secret that hides underneath the steaming hot springs? Now, early on, this is more of a comedy than it is a horror movie. And the humor is very fast and sharply edited, with punchlines that are thrown at the viewer quite relentlessly, actually. I do prefer this style of comedy over goofy slapstick. So that was actually a nice thing. The comedy does work okay in this. The lead actor plays it very straight and serious, which is a good choice over an, exaggerated, wacky performance. I think this movie avoids some of the pitfalls of horror comedies, especially Asian ones, which means that it's a surprisingly safe option for fans of this subgenre. In fact, if I were to use one word to describe this movie, it might be wholesome. There are some heartwarming moments that focus on the importance of family, which is commendable, and the emphasis on friendship is here as well. Later on, it shifts slightly more towards horror, but it never really gets scary. No, huge... Well, you know what? There is kind of a set piece at the very end that's quite effective. And there are a number of decent little moments peppered throughout of, little spooky events. I could draw a reference to an old television show, but I can't do it because it would be kind of a spoiler. But near the end of the film, you might draw some parallels with something from back in the day. And I did kind of like that. And I will say that the ending did have a few surprises that I was not necessarily expecting. What I can say is that there are direct references to a Chinese ghost story in this film, which were quite amusing. The runtime of 1 hour 48 minutes did seem a little bit long for this, and because of this, a few scenes do drag a little bit. They could have cut this down, I think. But still, pretty easy recommendation if you're into horror comedies. The availability of this one, Netflix streaming. So we've had some pretty fantastic availability of the films we're covering tonight. Now this is where I think we take another little jump in quality here. The next 4 films we're talking about this evening are, I think, even stronger recommendations from the first 3 that we've discussed. Now we travel to Malaysia for the next one, and this film is called Dukun. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. This film is loosely based on a true story of a gruesome murder of a Malaysian politician. After his daughter disappears, a man approaches an old friend who works for the government to help him find the girl. In return, he agrees to defend a woman shaman who has been arrested for allegedly murdering a high-profile businessman during a pagan ritual. During their first meeting, she surprises the man by revealing his past, and because of her inexplicable detailed knowledge, he begins to believe that she does indeed have supernatural abilities. Now, this was a pretty interesting production history on this one, which caused me quite a bit of confusion, because some websites list this film as a 2006 movie, and this came out in 2018. Now, according to Wikipedia, Dukun was actually filmed in 2006. That's back in the day, folks. And it was originally slated to be released the following year, but it was postponed indefinitely due to the fact that it's adapting a high-profile murder case, and it's kind of controversial, right? And the real-life shaman's family had problems with the film getting released and all this type of stuff. So it was shelved for a number of years. And then only a few years ago, it gained significant attention. Some footage was leaked, I guess, and then eventually it was decided that the movie should get released. So pretty crazy that this film, sat on the shelves for over a decade in completed form, basically. So this begins in a realistic, gritty manner, I think, with human executions and a decapitated head and stuff like that. Multiple plot lines emerge in parallel with each other. There's the case involving the witch doctor, which the plot synopsis suggested. But there's also the subplot involving the man who's attempting to find his daughter. And most of the runtime is going to focus on the murder investigation element. There are actually a lot of courtroom drama scenes that are kind of weaved into this, and as well as some flashbacks, but they're all pretty well executed. It's simply a good quality film from top to bottom. There are a few brief, creepy scenes involving a few visions or dreams that the protagonist has, and the witch doctor lady also does some pretty odd body contortions and rituals. There is enough here to classify it as horror, of course, but I think just enough. So it's not really reliant on big set pieces for its horror, for like the scares, but it kind of weaves in that creepiness, along with the drama. So if you're looking for like just a solid, slightly unconventional horror flick with a good dose of like courtroom drama and references to real life events, you should check this out. I think this is a good film, legitimately good film. Now, Dukun is available on Daily Motion, actually. All right, our next one here is another kind of genre bender, and we're getting some of those tonight. And that is Monstrum from South Korea. Now, this is a horror action movie, and it's set in the 16th century, so it's a period piece as well. A plague has taken over, and fear runs rampant in the streets. When rumors begin to spread that a vicious beast called Monstrum by the terrified masses is roaming a nearby mountain, fear turns into panic. In order to quell the rising hysteria, the king brings his most trusted general out of retirement. With his adoptive daughter and assistant in tow, he must find out if this creature is real or a figment of mass imagination. So, There is a political conflict existing as an undercurrent in this as well. The film itself points this out near the beginning, where a certain guy is dethroned by an opposing faction, and the new king is having problems with some of the people who put him in power starting to turn against him, undermining his authority and sending the nation into turmoil. So the king suspects that his enemies created this fictional monster to create chaos and put pressure on him politically. So it's kind of an interesting sub theme here. This has good performances. Kim Young-min is the lead, and you may recognize him in films such as VIP and the Detective K trilogy, as well as the K-drama The Lord of Dramas. Not much dramatic impact here in terms of the plotting, but the protagonists are likable enough and the premise is interesting enough. Historical production values are quite nice as well. Now, I won't spoil it if there's an actual monster or not, but there are horror elements regardless. Some nasty corpse shots and other stuff are implemented in this. Practical effects for the dead bodies are quite good, but then they use some CGI in spots and it's less convincing, let's say. We get some action scenes as well, some of which involve a bunch of people fighting with swords and arrows. And there's a good scene inside of a cave which has some suspense. And the finale is quite lengthy and satisfying enough. So historical horror action stories have been popularized in the West in recent years from South Korea. If you think of The Kingdom K-drama series or Rampant, the other movie that's kind of like a period horror action flick. Both of those I think are probably better than Monstrum. Well, Kingdom definitely is. And I think Rampant is a little bit better as well. But this is certainly watchable and recommended if you're into that kind of thing. So I recommend this one. And I rewatched it recently and I liked it a little bit more than I did the first time around. It's just a good, purely entertaining flick. Now the availability of Monstrum, it's on Amazon and Shudder. Alright, now we're getting a little goofy. We're getting a little bit goofy now. And of course, this is coming from Japan. And that is Ghost Squad, a comedy horror flick. Now the following plot synopsis was taken from the girlswithguns.org website. This is perhaps closer to a female version of The Frighteners, the early Peter Jackson film in which Michael J. Fox could see dead people and had to learn to work with them. The conduit in this case is Rika, a young woman who has been able to see ghosts since a young age. But an encounter with a trio of ghosts, all murder victims who are seeking revenge on their killers, opens a whole new realm. For, it turns out, whenever Rika is in a life-threatening situation, the spirits can take physical form. So the premise is unusual enough to be inherently interesting. When the living human protagonist gets injured or is closer to death, so to speak, the ghosts generate power and can better seek vengeance against the humans who wronged them. Because of this, there are a few plot developments and scenes of character interaction that are actually pretty good. It's important to note that this was directed by Noboru Iguchi, the man who gave us The Machine Girl and Dead Sushi, among other silly and gory projects. As expected, the humor in Ghost Squad is over the top, silly, awkward, demented, and perverted, all kind of thrown together. So if you're a fan of this director's prior films, you'll probably enjoy this as well. There's, for example, there's one of the ghost girls has, pigtails, and she acts cutesy, and she licks the protagonist's face like a dog throughout the film. So all this stuff should be no surprise to any of you, if you're familiar with the director or this country of origin. There is some bloody violence, and the ghosts really enjoy beating people and killing them, to the point where they hysterically laugh and act overly cute while doing it. Many viewers who are unfamiliar with this kind of thing could just stop watching the film during the opening sequence. They'll just be turned off by it. But I did like how this film was executed and how the ghosts could physically attack human beings. There's a ridiculous fight, I guess you could say, against a murderer in an apartment, with the punches and kicks being intentionally slow and missing their target. It was really, really quite amusing. Each of the ghost stories are basically exactly the same thing, meaning that things do get a little bit repetitive in this. The film does take itself seriously, more seriously than you might think, despite the fact that it's really silly. Every plot point is very slowly and cleanly explained by the characters, but the expedition does slow things down a little bit. There are a few slightly disturbing flashback scenes that imply bad things that happened to these girls before they died. So this film is not entirely lighthearted gags, which creates a little bit of balance. Now, I would say this is not quite as delightfully entertaining as Iguchi's best flicks, but this is recommended for those who have a peculiar sense of humor. Availability of Ghost Squad. It's on Amazon as well as Crackle. Not a website I use that often, but it's out there. And our last film tonight was a little bit of a surprise for me. It is. And that is Suzzanna, Buried Alive. This is from Indonesia. So Suzzanna and Satria have been married for 7 years, but have not been blessed with children. They live with 3 assistants. Suzzanna's long-awaited pregnancy finally happens, but unfortunately, it has coincided with Satria's business travel to Japan. Now, this opportunity is utilized by 4 household employees who hold grudges against Satria and intend to rob the house when it's empty. Their robbery plan results in the murder of the woman, unfortunately, but strangely enough, the next day, she returns and continues to act as usual at home, as if nothing has happened. So what's going on with this Suzzanna lady? One thing I liked about this film is that it feels a little bit different from other stories of its kind. So, like, after this woman's death in the first act of the film, the filmmakers show events from the perspective of both the humans and the ghost. So the ghost continues to live in her human form some of the time, but becomes a vengeful spirit when targeting the 4 perpetrators. And her, she has a few nice housekeepers who did not wrong her. And they begin suspecting that something's going on with this lady, which is like one aspect of the film. And then you have the 4 evil perpetrators who know that she's a ghost or some type of evil spirit because they're trying to survive all of her attacks, like at nighttime. So the film kind of shifts between these 2 groups of people, protagonists and antagonists, while the ghostly entity interacts with all of them. And it's a pretty interesting structure, for sure, and allows the film to kind of shift tones, because there's a dash of black humor during the daytime or whatever when you're involving the nice housekeepers, and then the tone is distinctly horrific when the perpetrators are shown, and she's attacking them for revenge. It also takes its time to set up big sequences, which makes them feel lengthy and satisfying. The break-in sequence during the first act, very long, and surprisingly suspenseful. Nicely directed by Rocky Sorlaya, who I've covered quite a bit on this channel. I think Suzzanna is probably the best directed film that he's done that I have seen. So, if you're familiar with this guy, a handful of his films were released on Netflix in the United States. And I think this one is the most interesting one out of all of them, probably. A few good death scenes we get. There's some fairly macabre elements and bloody images. The ghost cackles a lot as well, almost like a crazy witch. The lead actress has a very distinctive looking face. Her bone structure is a little bit different, and it makes her stand out in terms of facial features. Another odd thing is that I swear there was a line in this movie, or a thing of text, saying that it was made in memory of a real-life lady named Suzzanna. So they made a movie with a woman named Suzzanna, or a character, and she gets murdered and turns into a ghost. And they did this in honor of another woman in real life. I thought it was kind of odd, but no. It would be interesting to know further backstory on that one. So, in any case, this was a surprisingly neat movie. I actually quite enjoyed this. Little surprising, like I said. So I definitely recommend this one. Check it out. Now, this film is available on Netflix. At least in the United States it is. So a pretty interesting little batch of films tonight. that concludes part 3 of our journey through Asian horror films released in 2018. We had some genre benders, a little bit of comedy mixed in, courtroom drama stuff mixed in, period piece action mixed in. So it's all a matter of your personal taste, which one of these you might want to watch. Now, part 4, we're covering the 10 best Asian horror films from this year. And in that video, the upcoming video, I think it's going to be a pretty strong top 10. So if some of the films I've covered already don't tickle your fancy, there's going to be some really good ones coming up in the next video. So, as always, folks, I'll see you next time.